Welcome to today's historical deep dive, where we peel back the layers of the past to understand the minds that shaped it. Imagine a man who redrew the map of Europe, whose very name became synonymous with ambition, and whose shadow still stretches across textbooks centuries later. Was he the revolutionary savior, the brilliant strategist, or the ruthless tyrant? The truth, as always, is far more complex, and often far darker. If you love immersive, real storytelling about ambition and downfall, hit like and subscribe. It helps us more than you know. Drop a comment with your favorite Napoleon quote, or the moment that shocked you most. Let's begin, and change the way you think about history. You stand in the cold pre-dawn darkness of 21st March, 1804. The air bites, thick with the scent of damp earth, and something else, something like fear. You are outside the moats of Fort Vincennes, a place soon to be etched into history for a single chilling act. Inside these walls, a young Bourbon prince, Louis Antoine, Duke of Enghien, is being rushed through a hasty, illegal trial. It is a mockery of justice, decided before it even began. Your orders arrived hours ago, stark and unforgiving. Eliminate a perceived threat. Make an example. This wasn't the battlefield brilliance of Lodi, where cannon smoke mingled with glory, or the deft political maneuvering of Brumaire, where a coup felt like an elegant dance. This is the quiet, brutal exercise of absolute power, born not of grand strategy, but of gnawing paranoia and a desperate, visceral need to stamp out every whisper of dissent before cementing your fragile rule. You are Napoleon, first consul for life, poised to become emperor, but the whispers of royalist plots and the lingering specter of monarchy haunt your path like persistent ghosts. The executioner's volley shatters the dawn silence, and with it, a line is crossed that can never be uncrossed. Europe gasps in shock and outrage. The revolutionary general who promised stability, who rose on the principles of liberty and equality, has just committed an act chillingly reminiscent of the monarchs he overthrew, a royal life extinguished by arbitrary will. It is a moment of profound, tragic irony. This instant reveals a fundamental truth about power, especially when consolidating its grip. It craves security above all else, often at the agonizing cost of justice and mercy. The insight here is stark and unavoidable. The path to absolute authority is often paved with ruthless decisions made in the shadow of perceived threats, real or imagined. The moral takeaway? The justifications we create for necessary evils, for acts we deem essential for survival or stability, often become the insidious foundation of our own moral compromise, slowly eroding the very principles and ideals we claim to defend. Ask yourself, standing in the cold light of that dawn, was this necessary for survival, or the first fatal step towards becoming the very thing you fought against? What does this moment tell us about the compromises leaders make and the price history exacts for them? Welcome to today's historical deep dive, where we step beyond the dusty dates and into the beating heart of monumental lives. Forget the stiff portraits and mythologized statues for a moment. We're stripping away the layers of legend to ask, what truly drove the man who redrew the map of Europe? We're talking about ambition so vast it seemed to consume the continent, a legacy carved in victory and defeat, a personal journey from obscure origins to imperial throne. But how does a mere mortal become an emperor? How does a boy from a tiny island forge the will to command armies and empires? What secrets of power and psychology lie beneath the famous bygone hat? This isn't just a story of battles, it's a study in human nature, in the relentless pursuit of greatness, and the often dark roots from which it springs. If you love immersive, real storytelling about ambition and downfall, hit like and subscribe. It helps us more than you know. Join us as we unpack the man, the myth, and the moments that shaped a world. Drop a comment with your favorite Napoleon quote or the moment that shocked you most. Let's begin and change the way you think about history. You are not yet Napoleon, the son of Austerlitz, the emperor of the French. You are Bonaparte, a Corsican boy, dropped into the rigid, alien world of French military academies. The air hangs heavy with unspoken judgment. They mock your thick accent, the strange, island cadences that twist your words. You feel the sting of it daily, a constant, low-burning fire of resentment in your gut. They see an outsider, a provincial anomaly in their polished ranks. You see a world that underestimates you, a challenge you are already desperate to meet. This isn't a scene from a distant past. It's the very forge of your will. Isolated, you retreat into the only world that doesn't judge, the world of books. You devour history, the Romans, Alexander, Caesar. You trace their campaigns, memorize their tactics, internalize their triumphs and their fallibility. Military theory becomes your language, Enlightenment philosophy your hidden weapon, offering visions of a world where merit, not birthright, could prevail. You are brilliant, yes, undeniably sharp, soaking up knowledge like the dry Corsican earth after a rare storm. But raw intelligence isn't enough in this ancien regime world built on connections and lineage. The isolation bites deeper, fueling a fierce, almost desperate ambition. It's not just about achievement, it's about validation, about shoving their sneering faces into the undeniable proof of your superiority. It's about imposing your will on a society that initially tried to box you in, to dismiss you as merely that odd little Corsican. This is the crucial, hidden transformation. The perceived slights, the feeling of never quite belonging, becomes less a wound and more a powerful, volatile engine. It's the dark secret of your drive, a deep-seated insecurity masked by an ever-increasing intensity. It pushes you harder than those born to privilege, makes you study longer, plan more meticulously, and eventually take risks others wouldn't dare contemplate. Talent is the seed, but this burning need to prove them wrong is the relentless sun that forces it to grow, sometimes beautifully, sometimes monstrously. Ask yourself, what drives the truly relentless? Is it always a pure vision, or sometimes just the desperate need to silence the whispers of doubt, internal or external? The origins of great drive are often rooted in vulnerability, a need for external validation, a fire that can indeed build empires, but just as easily consume everything in its path. Then came the revolution, a tempest that tore down the old order and created a vacuum of power and opportunity unlike any seen in generations. You are thrust into this maelstrom, a young artillery officer named Napoleon Bonaparte, arriving at Toulon in 1793. The city is a chaotic mess, divided between loyalists and revolutionaries, under siege by convention forces, with the British fleet, the Royal Navy, the very symbol of maritime dominance, anchored arrogantly in the harbor, invited by the anti-revolutionary faction. Look around, while seasoned generals dither, bogged down in conventional tactics and the sheer confusion of revolutionary command structures. You see the battlefield like a complex geometry problem, or perhaps a chessboard, where pieces aren't just moved, but removed entirely. Others see impassable defenses. You see angles, weaknesses, the singular decisive point. The British ships aren't just scattered vessels. They are vulnerable if their protective land batteries can be neutralized. You fix your gaze on Fort Mulgrave, a heavily fortified promontory known as Little Gibraltar. Its position is key. Control it, and you command the inner harbor, making it untenable for the enemy fleet. Your proposal is audacious, almost insolent from a mere captain. Concentrate fire on Mulgrave, seize it, and the British must flee. While others hesitate, arguing, posturing, you cut through the noise with cold logic and absolute conviction. You don't just propose the plan, you secure the necessary artillery. You direct the batteries, you expose yourself fearlessly to fire, rallying troops demoralized by indecision and poor leadership. When the moment comes, you execute the assault on Little Gibraltar with ruthless efficiency, driving the British and their allies from the key position. The guns are turned on the harbor, and the mighty Royal Navy is forced to make a hurried, humiliating withdrawal. Your name, Bonaparte, until now just another entry on an officer list, is noted, promoted, recognized. This crucible reveals an essential, if chilling, truth about ambition. Opportunity often hides within the deepest crisis. You didn't create the revolution. You weren't even a prominent voice in its early stages, but you were ready, trained, observant, utterly without sentimentality when facing military objectives, to leverage its upheaval for your own advancement. The insight gained here, seared into your understanding of power, is that fortune overwhelmingly favors the prepared mind that is also willing to act decisively, even ruthlessly, in uncertain, chaotic times. The moral? Don't just lament instability. Look for the gaps it creates, the old structures instability undermines. But be acutely aware that exploiting chaos at this level requires a certain detachment from its human cost. Toulon wasn't just a strategic victory, it was a bloodbath, followed by brutal revolutionary reprisals against the city's population. Your success was built, quite literally, on a foundation of revolutionary violence and personal suffering. Ask yourself, was this brilliance born of opportunity, or simply seizing power through the calculated exploitation of human and political chaos? What would you have done, standing in his boots, with France tearing itself apart and your own future uncertain? You stand before the army of Italy, a collection of shivering, hungry men in tattered uniforms, forgotten by Paris. This isn't the Grande Armée of later legend. It's a starving, dispirited force, nicknamed the Army of Rags. Yet, in your eyes, you see not destitution, but potential. This is where the myth begins, not on a grand stage, but in the mud and rain of Piedmont. Your core decision is simple yet audacious. Ignore the conventional lines, the slow sieges, the cautious maneuvers. You will unleash a whirlwind. You speak to these men not of duty, but of glory. Of fertile plains ripe for plunder, of a destiny awaiting them across the Alps. It's a surprising detail. He didn't promise abstract ideals initially, but tangible rewards that resonated with their immediate needs. You move with lightning speed, forcing marches that stun the lumbering Austrian and Piedmontese armies. You divide and conquer, throwing smaller, faster forces against segments of larger enemies, creating local superiority. It's a brutal form of battlefield chess played at breakneck pace, where checkmate comes via exhaustion and psychological collapse as much as firepower. You lead from the absolute front. At Lodi, you are on the bridge under enemy fire, rallying the wavering troops. At Arcole, you personally seize a flag and charge, pulling the army forward through sheer willpower. This wasn't reckless bravado. It was a calculated display of courage that forged an unbreakable bond. They didn't just respect you, they began to adore you. He wasn't just their general, he was their comrade in arms, touched by destiny. This campaign becomes a masterclass in turning limited resources, scant supplies, demoralized troops, into overwhelming psychological force. You make them believe they are invincible because they see you believe it. The victories pile up with dizzying speed. Montenot, Millesimo, Mondovì, Lodi, Castiglione, Arcole, Rivoli. You shatter kingdoms and empires, forcing treaties at gunpoint. This early dramatic success solidifies something profound within you, an unshakable self-belief. You learn, firsthand, the intoxicating power of charismatic authority, the ability to make thousands risk their lives, not just for country or cause, but because you ask them to. This power is exhilarating, proving that courage and conviction can overcome overwhelming material odds. But ask yourself, is this early taste of near-absolute authority a foundation for future greatness, or the first dose of an addiction that will ultimately demand everything? This campaign teaches you the world bends to audacity, a lesson you will never forget. November 1799. France, the volatile crucible of revolution, is drifting. The Directory, the five-man committee meant to steer the nation after the terror, has proven weak, corrupt, and wildly unpopular. The people crave order, stability, a strong hand. You, Napoleon Bonaparte, return from Egypt. The campaign there ended awkwardly, a strategic retreat disguised by propaganda. Yet, the legend persists. You are the conquering hero of Italy, the man who tamed chaos with cannons and clarity. Your name electrifies Paris. This is the moment. You conspire. With allies in government and the military, the plan takes shape. A coup, swift and decisive, replacing the Directory with a new consulate, where you will hold the reins. The chosen date, 18th Brumaire, year 8 of the Republic, November 9th, 1799. It's a gamble, a leap into the political abyss, a different kind of battlefield where words are weapons and allegiances shift like sand. The first day goes smoothly enough, forcing the councils to move outside Paris under military escort. But the second day, 19th Brumaire, at the Palace of St. Cloud, the plan begins to unravel. You stride into the Council of Ancients first, delivering a confident speech. But when you enter the Council of 500, the air is instantly hostile. Deputies erupt in fury, shouting, "Down with the tyrant! Down with the dictator!" It wasn't supposed to be like this. These are politicians, lawyers, revolutionaries, not Austrian squares to be broken by cavalry. You try to speak, to justify the coup, to project authority, but the chaos is overwhelming. They press in, jostling, threatening. You stammer. Your words catch in your throat. You look for a terrifying moment, weak, unsure. This is the decorated general, the master strategist, faltering under the verbal assault of panicked assemblymen. It's an utterly human, deeply awkward failure of nerve in the face of unexpected political resistance. Guards rush in, half dragging you out, saving you from physical attack. But your reputation hangs by a thread. The coup is collapsing. Then your younger brother, Napoleon Bonaparte, the president of the Council of 500, steps into the breach. He sees the disaster unfolding. He races outside to the troops gathered, dramatically declaring that the council is controlled by assassins, that they tried to murder their general. In a moment of pure, theatrical genius, perhaps the most crucial piece of luck you ever had, he grabs a dagger and holds it to your chest, vowing to kill you himself if you ever betray the ideals of the Republic. It's a magnificent lie, a desperate bluff, but the soldiers believe it. They storm the hall, clearing it at bayonet point. The council is dispersed, and the coup, saved from ignominy by a brother's quick thinking and a bit of dramatic flair, is back on track. This wasn't Austerlitz. There was no elegant maneuver, no perfectly executed strategy. This was a messy scramble, a triumph born of stumbling, bluffing, and relying on others. It's a stark reminder that seizing ultimate political power rarely looks like the clean victories of the battlefield. It requires nerve, timing, and sometimes sheer dumb luck and the decisive intervention of someone else. Ask yourself, what does it mean that the foundations of a new regime were laid on such a fragile, almost farcical moment? The insight here is that ambition often necessitates pragmatic, awkward leaps into the unknown, trading grand pronouncements for desperate improvisation. The moral reflection? The means used to gain power, even if justified as necessary for order, inevitably shape the character of the rule that follows. Brumaire was a victory for order, yes, pulling France back from the brink of anarchy. But it was also a decisive defeat for the democratic ideals the revolution had supposedly fought for, ushered in by a general who couldn't handle a hostile debate. The clumsy coup set a precedent. Authority would now come from the military, not the ballot box. He exchanges the mud-caked boots of the battlefield for the polished shoes of the administrator. As first consul, you step into the fractured heart of France, not with a drawn sword, but with a pen and an insatiable appetite for detail. The roar of cannons fades, replaced by the scratching of quills and the shuffling of paper. This is where the relentless energy, once poured into conquering armies, is redirected into building a state from the ground up. You work 18-hour days, poring over budgets, legal drafts, administrative reforms. No detail is too small. You are not merely signing decrees. You are personally shaping them, hammering out the framework of a new society from the chaos left by revolution. You draft the laws, stabilize the nation's precarious finances, and commission ambitious infrastructure projects, roads, canals, the arteries of a modern state beginning to pulse. Peace is negotiated, a fleeting moment of calm you pragmatically seize, though the builder in you knows true power needs more than temporary truces. A Bank of France is established, giving the economy a stability it hasn't known in a decade. The concordat with the Pope heals a deep festering wound, reconciling the state with the Church, a shrewd move to unify a divided populace. And then the masterpiece, the Civil Code. This is your creation, a rational, comprehensive body of law designed to bring clarity and equality, at least in theory, to French citizens. It's not the glory of a battlefield victory, but perhaps your most enduring legacy. You openly declare it your proudest achievement. The bedrock upon which the new France will stand. This period reveals a critical dimension of your ambition. It is not solely about personal aggrandizement or military dominance. It is also a powerful drive to create, to impose order, to build a rational, efficient, and lasting state. You understand, perhaps better than anyone before you, that durable power is not just taken by force. It is built on a foundation of effective governance, economic stability, and tangible improvements in the lives of ordinary people. You are transitioning from the revolutionary conqueror to the pragmatic builder. Yet, lurking beneath the administrative genius is the shadow of the general. The framework you build is designed for control, for centralization around your authority. The laws reflect your will. The institutions serve your state. Ask yourself, was this incredible period of construction the act of a visionary statesman laying groundwork for future prosperity? Or simply another, perhaps more subtle, method of consolidating absolute power under a guise of order and progress? The ease with which you transition from creator to renewed conqueror suggests the dramatic gesture of military glory still calls to you, a siren song promising faster, perhaps less permanent forms of power. The builder's vision is clear, but the battlefield's allure remains potent. The ink is still drying on the Treaty of Amiens, a fragile truce signed in 1802. Europe breathes a collective sigh of relief, exhausted by a decade of revolutionary upheaval and constant war. You stand at the zenith of your popularity, first consul, a man who has brought order from chaos, peace from conflict. The grand experiment of revolutionary France, now stabilized under your hand, seems secure. But beneath the veneer of peace, the ground trembles. Old enemies haven't vanished. They've merely retreated into the shadows. Royalists, clinging to the hope of a Bourbon restoration, plot your assassination. Jacobins, disillusioned by your authoritarian turn, whisper sedition. Paris, the city you've tamed, is a nest of spies and conspiracies. You hear the whispers, you read the intercepted letters, and the constant threat begins to gnaw at you. Every public appearance is a risk. Every handshake could conceal a dagger. Sleep becomes fitful, haunted by the specter of sudden death. The weight of the nation, perched precariously on your existence, becomes an unbearable burden. You realize that your life is not just your own. It is the linchpin holding this new France together. The tension escalates dramatically with the Cadoudal plot. George Cadoudal, a formidable Chouan leader, infiltrated France with a network of royalist agents, intent on decapitating the regime, literally. High-ranking figures, even your former comrade Moreau, are implicated. The proximity of the threat is terrifying. It confirms your deepest fears. They will stop at nothing. This isn't just political opposition. It's an existential war against you. Paranoia, once a creeping vine, now threatens to choke your judgment. You become convinced that the Bourbon princes exiled across Europe are actively funding and directing these attempts. To deter them, you reason, you must strike a blow so swift and brutal it will paralyze their will. Suspicion falls upon the young Duke of Enghien, a Bourbon prince residing just across the border in Baden. The evidence linking him directly to the cadotal plot is flimsy, based more on presumption than proof. Yet the desire for a preventative strike is overwhelming. You demand his arrest. French dragoons cross into sovereign territory under the cloak of night. Seizing the unsuspecting prince, he is brought to the Château de Vincennes, given a hasty midnight trial, and condemned based on scant evidence and furious conjecture. The execution takes place immediately, before dawn, in the castle moat. The decision sends shockwaves across Europe. It is a calculated act of terror, meant to warn the Bourbons and their allies. Attack me, and I will strike at your very bloodline. It is a moment of chilling transformation. The pragmatic statesman yields to the ruthless protector of his power. You have crossed a line, demonstrating that security, in your eyes, now justifies preemptive violence and the abandonment of legal norms. Ask yourself, was this the necessary cost of protecting the revolution? Or did the fear of losing power finally corrupt the ambition that built it? This moment reveals a dark truth. The higher you climb, the more exposed you become, and the more tempting it is to use fear as your shield, trapping yourself in a fortress of suspicion and isolation. The title of First Consul for life now feels like a finely tailored jacket that's suddenly become too small. The murmur around you grows louder, a chorus of advisors, politicians, and even marshals, weary souls who remember the chaotic ebb and flow of the revolution. They whisper of stability, of permanence, of an ancient form of rule that can anchor the unpredictable ship of state in stormy seas. They speak of heredity. The suggestion isn't merely political. It's a lifeline offered by a nation exhausted by uncertainty. You listen, you analyze, and the calculations begin. Becoming emperor, they argue, is the logical, necessary step. It secures the immense gains of the revolution, protecting France not just from external enemies gathering like dark clouds on the horizon, but from the ever-present threat of internal factions tearing at its fragile new fabric. It solidifies your legacy, embedding the changes you've wrought not just in law, but in bloodline. It's presented as the ultimate act of public service, a final, binding guarantee of France's future. But beneath the veneer of pragmatic necessity, a deeper, more elemental force stirs. The description is clear. Beneath the political calculation lies the undeniable pull of ultimate status, the crown. This isn't just about protecting the state anymore. It's about embodying it. It's the subtle, insidious shift where the noble goal of consolidating revolutionary ideals begins to morph into the personal desire for a dynastic legacy, for a name etched in the annals of kings, not just generals. The insight hits like a cold dawn. Success doesn't satiate ambition. It merely changes its object, raising the stakes from survival to dynastic permanence. The consulship for life offered power, yes, but a crown? A crown offers immortality, a bloodline woven into the very tapestry of the nation, a personal monument grander than any Arc de Triomphe. This is the crucial pivot point, the moment the seed of eventual overreach is sown. You convince yourself, and perhaps genuinely believe, that this is for France. But the gleam in your eye, the subtle tightening of your jaw, speaks of something more personal, more profound. The takeaway for us, watching from centuries later, is chillingly relevant. Be acutely aware when your noble goals begin to morph into personal desires for status and immortality. as this is where the seeds of ruin are truly planted. What would you have done, standing on the precipice of absolute hereditary power, with the future of a nation in your hands, and the glint of gold reflecting in your own ambitious eyes? The whisper of crowns is hypnotic, and few can resist its siren song. December 2nd, 1804. The stone arches of Notre Dame loom, cold and cavernous, heavy with centuries of tradition. The air inside is thick with incense and anticipation. Before you stands Pope Pius VII, head of the ancient church, a figure meant to bridge your revolutionary authority with the divine right you ostensibly replaced. The stage is set for a coronation, a performance designed to legitimate the meteoric rise of Napoleon Bonaparte. But this isn't a moment of humble acceptance. It's a definitive, audacious claim. You don't wait for the Pope's blessing or touch. As the sacred crown rests on the altar, heavy with history and symbolism, you reach for it. Your hand, the hand of a general who clawed his way to power through blood and strategy, lifts the diadem. The world watches as you turn, not to kneel before the pontiff, but to face the assembled dignitaries and the weight of your own making. With deliberate, undeniable resolve, you place the imperial crown upon your own head. It is a breathtaking act of self-sovereignty. A man crowning himself emperor. You did not inherit this throne from kings, nor did you receive it solely through popular acclamation. Though you manipulated both forces, you took it. You earned it on battlefields and in legislative halls. This gesture declares that your power stems from you, from your will, your genius, your achievements. It is the ultimate expression of the self-made man writ large on the stage of European history. Next, you turn to Josephine. You lift a smaller crown and place it gently, perhaps tenderly, upon her head. It's a moment of shared elevation, binding your personal life to this new, self-created dynasty. The message is clear. The Bonaparte era has begun, forged not in ancient lineage or divine mandate, but in the crucible of revolution and the furnace of your ambition. This carefully choreographed spectacle is a deliberate fusion. Revolutionary legitimacy draped in monarchical robes, a new wine poured into old impressive bottles. Yet, there is a profound, perhaps tragic, irony embedded in this scene. Why the elaborate theater if your power is self-evident, self-derived? The very need for such a grand external validation, enacted before the eyes of a skeptical Europe and a nation hungry for stability, hints at something deeper. Does the dazzling surface of this self-coronation reveal, rather than hide, the underlying insecurity of newly acquired power? A king inherits, an emperor takes. But even the one who takes feels the need to solemnize the moment with the oldest symbols. It prompts a vital reflection. When you feel an overwhelming need for grand external validation, be it a title, recognition, or public display, pause and ask why internal conviction isn't sufficient. The dazzling surface often hides a deeper, quieter need for acceptance, perhaps even from the self. For all the power embodied in that act, it was fundamentally a performance, necessary because the legitimacy was claimed, not given. Ask yourself, was this the ultimate display of earned power, or the first crack in the facade, revealing the relentless demand for external approval that would follow you to your final exile? The coronation oil is still fresh on your brow, and the world irrevocably changes. You wear the crown, not as a king inherited, but as an emperor forged. And suddenly, the game isn't merely defending France from hostile monarchies. It's about cementing your dynasty, building your empire, writing your name across the map of Europe in bold, permanent ink. You are no longer just the first consul, the brilliant general preserving the revolution's gains. You are Napoleon, Emperor of the French, and every enemy coalition, every diplomatic snarl, feels less like a threat to the nation and more like a personal affront to your manufactured dignity. This is the turning point, the dangerous expansion of ambition. The scale shifts from national security to imperial grandeur, from tactical defense to strategic dominance for dominance's sake. Your family, once a private concern, becomes a tool of statecraft. Brothers, sisters, stepchildren are suddenly pieces on a vast chessboard, placed on thrones in Naples, Spain, Holland, Westphalia. Nations aren't ancient entities with their own histories and identities. They are territories to be governed by Bonapartes, redrawable lines on a map reflecting your will, your reach. You are no longer fighting solely for the ideals or security of France. You are fighting for the glory and perpetuation of the Napoleonic Empire, a project deeply personal, intricately tied to your own survival and legacy. Consider the sheer audacity. Within a few years of crowning yourself, you are installing Joseph as King of Naples, then King of Spain, making Louis King of Holland, giving Elisa the Principality of Lucca and Piombino, Pauline the Duchy of Guastalla, and Caroline the Grand Duchy of Berg through Murat. This isn't statecraft born purely of strategic necessity for France's borders. This is empire building as a family business, a way to extend your influence, ensure loyalty, and legitimize your ascent by creating satellite courts beholden to your authority. It's a surprising detail. The revolutionary leader, establishing a dynastic system more rapacious and personal than many of the old monarchies he overthrew. There's a tragic irony in the fact that these carefully placed family members often proved unreliable, incompetent, or more loyal to their new subjects than to you, demanding constant oversight and intervention that drained your resources and attention. The wars that follow, while often triggered by the real threats from powers like Britain and Austria, take on a different hue. They become crusades not just to protect France, but to punish those who challenge your imperial status, to force recognition of your title and your rearrangement of Europe. The pursuit of control becomes the dominant motive, divorced from its original utility. You crush armies at Austerlitz, Jena, Friedland, but the goal is no longer just peace or security for France. It's about imposing your will on the continent, forcing emperors and kings to bow to your preeminence, to accept your family's right to rule their neighbors. This transition from first consul to emperor reveals a critical insight into the corrupting nature of power. Elevating yourself to god-like status fundamentally alters your perspective, subtly substituting personal ego and the defense of your title for the broader, more rational interests of the nation you once served. The lines blur until protecting the empire is protecting yourself, and protecting yourself justifies almost any expansion, any risk. It's no longer about what is best for France, but what is necessary to maintain the status of Napoleon Emperor. What would you have done, standing in his boots, with the cheers of Paris still echoing and the world seemingly at your feet? Would the grandeur become the goal itself? Would you lose sight of the original purpose in the intoxicating pursuit of absolute control and recognition? The game changes, and the stakes become fatally personal. December 2nd, 1805, Austerlitz. Exactly 1 year since you placed the imperial crown upon your own head, you stand on a cold, fog-choked plain in Moravia. Ahead lies not just an army, but the combined might of 2 empires, Austria and Russia, commanded by their own emperors. They outnumber you. The stakes are not just strategic, but existential, for your crown, your dynasty, your very vision of a new Europe. But where others see an impossible challenge shrouded in mist, you see the perfect stage. Your mind, a whirlwind of calculation and foresight, dissects the terrain, anticipates the enemy's movements before they make them. This is it. This is the battle you've trained for your entire life. The moment where military science, strategic genius, and sheer, unadulterated will converge. You hold the reins of an empire's resources, wield an army forged in revolution and conquest, and the target is the heart of the old world order. The battle unfolds like a macabre ballet choreographed by your hand. Feints, traps, precisely timed assaults. The thick fog, initially a hindrance, becomes your accomplice, hiding your true intentions, lulling the enemy into fatal errors. And then, at the critical hour, as your guard prepares for the decisive blow, the mist burns away. The sun, a glorious golden orb, breaks through the clouds. The sun of Austerlitz. It illuminates the battlefield, reveals the enemy's exposed flanks, and feels less like coincidence and more like destiny shining upon your endeavors. You achieve total victory. The Austrian and Russian armies are shattered, routed. Emperors humble themselves, seeking terms of peace. This is the masterpiece, your greatest battle, the absolute zenith of your military genius, demonstrating an unparalleled understanding of war on a grand scale. Yet, this dazzling triumph, this undeniable proof of your brilliance, carried whispers that this model of relentless expansion, this reliance on personal brilliance, is infinitely scalable, ignoring the quiet accumulation of resentment, exhaustion, and hardened opposition across Europe. Austerlitz wasn't just a victory. It was a powerful, intoxicating drug that told you you were invincible. Ask yourself, when you stand at the absolute peak of your power, showered in success, does brilliance feel like a valid reason to abandon caution? Or is it simply the most intoxicating form of self-deception? Kingdoms tumble like dominoes. Alliances shatter into dust. And you, Napoleon, stand with chalk in hand, casually redrawing the map of Europe. The victories of Austerlitz, Jena Auerstedt, Friedland, they haven't sated the hunger, they've sharpened it. Now consolidation isn't enough. Expansion is the only policy, control the only security. You look across the continent, not for partners, but for pieces to fit your ever-growing puzzle. The ancient, sprawling mess of the Holy Roman Empire, an anachronism, a relic of a bygone age. You dissolve it with a stroke of your pen in 1806. Centuries of history wiped away, replaced by the Confederation of the Rhine, a collection of German states tied explicitly to your will, a buffer and a source of soldiers. This isn't liberation, it's integration into the Bonapartist system. You are not merely conqueror, you are the architect of a new Europe built in your image. But Britain remains, an island nation, frustratingly beyond the reach of your armies. Diplomacy fails. Invasion is too risky after Trafalgar. Your answer is economic war, the continental system. From Berlin in 1806, you issue decrees forbidding any nation under your influence, or wishing to trade with you, from trading with Britain. This isn't just trade policy, it's a siege on a global scale, a totalizing attempt to bend reality to your will. You believe you can strangle the island economy, bring the mighty British lion to its knees without firing a shot on land. This era sees your treatment of other European powers shift from strategic negotiation to overt disdain. Austria, Prussia, even Russia at times. They are merely players on your board, to be moved, manipulated, or punished. Treaties are temporary measures until the next advantage presents itself. Old royal families steeped in lineage and tradition are treated with thinly veiled contempt or outright dismissal. You, the child of the revolution, now treat hereditary crowns as tools to be handed out. And hand them out you do. Your family, brothers, sisters, stepchildren, are placed on newly created or vacated thrones across Europe. Joseph in Naples, then Spain, Louis in Holland, Jerome in Westphalia, Elisa ruling principalities in Italy, Caroline married to Murat, who becomes king of Naples. This is meant to cement your power, create a loyal network of rulers. Yet it becomes a constant source of aggravation. Your siblings often lack the competence, the ruthlessness, or frankly, the blind obedience you expect. Louis in Holland grows sympathetic to his Dutch subjects and lax on the continental system, forcing you to eventually annex the country entirely. Joseph struggles endlessly with rebellions in Spain. Jerome proves feckless and extravagant. You install them for loyalty, but their failures and independent streaks demand your constant attention, draining energy better spent elsewhere. The administrative brilliance of the consulate, the focus on efficient, centralized governance within France, is now stretched thin across a continent. You are attempting to manage this vast, disparate empire through personal decrees sent from Paris, through the often incompetent hands of family members, and through the loyalty of marshals who are generals, not civil servants. The lines of command are tangled, communication is slow, and local realities are often ignored in favor of grand, top-down schemes like the continental system, which causes immense hardship and resentment in satellite states. This period is a masterclass in unchecked ambition. Every border not under your direct control feels like a potential vulnerability. Every independent power, no matter how cowed, seems like a potential enemy waiting to rise. The only solution in this mindset is more control, more expansion, more integration into the Bonapartist system. It's a relentless, almost compulsive drive, born perhaps from insecurity as much as strength, a need to dominate every variable. But consider the consequence, the profound irony unfolding. This constant state of expansion, while initially fueled by victorious momentum, creates an ever-expanding perimeter that is increasingly difficult to defend, to supply, to manage. The resources required are immense: soldiers, administrators, money. More critically, it breeds deep, simmering resentment in the populations you dominate and the rulers you displace or dictate terms to. The seed of future resistance, of nationalistic backlash against French rule is being sown across Germany, Italy, Spain, and beyond. You are building an empire that is brilliant in theory, but fragile and unsustainable in practice, setting the stage, piece by piece, for the inevitable collapse under its own unmanageable weight. Ask yourself, when does ambition cease to be a drive for achievement and become a self-destructive addiction to control? You look towards Spain, seeing not a nation with its own identity, but another piece on your continental chessboard, ripe for rearrangement. The aging Bourbon monarchy seems weak, corrupted, a relic, an opportunity. You depose King Charles IV and his son Ferdinand VII with political sleight of hand, a carefully orchestrated family squabble turned abdication drama. You install your brother, Joseph Bonaparte, the seemingly logical step, placing a loyal family member on a critical throne to secure your southern flank, to enforce the continental system. You expect a smooth transition, perhaps some minor grumbling, easily quelled by French military presence. After all, you've redrawn maps across Europe, appointed kings and dukes from your own circle, and met resistance with overwhelming force on battlefields, winning every time. Spain, you believe, will be no different. You see the crown, the territory, the strategic value. You fail to truly see the people. What unfolds is not a conventional war of armies, but something far more insidious, born of fury and fiercely protected identity. The Spanish people rise up, not unified by a king you deposed, but by a deep-seated national pride you entirely underestimated. This isn't professional soldiers marching in formation. It's peasants, priests, nobles, women, children, a nation in arms, fighting with brutal, localized ferocity. Guerrilla, little war, enters the global lexicon, a term forged in the crucible of Spanish resistance. Your best troops, hardened veterans of Austerlitz and Jena, find themselves bled white in endless skirmishes, ambushes, and sieges against an enemy that melts into the hills and cities, only to reappear when least expected. Madrid becomes a hostile fortress. Communication lines are severed, supply trains vanish, isolated garrisons are massacred. You pour hundreds of thousands of men, mountains of supplies, vast sums of money into this struggle, resources desperately needed elsewhere. The Spanish ulcer festering, a constant drain. It bleeds your empire dry, soldier by soldier, franc by franc. The cruel irony is palpable. Your attempt to consolidate control and strengthen your hold on Europe creates a perpetual drain that ultimately weakens you significantly. Your unparalleled military machine built for grand battles and sweeping maneuvers proves ill-suited for this decentralized, total national resistance. It's a harsh lesson in the limits of conventional power when faced with the elemental force of popular will and national identity. You conquered armies, but how do you conquer a people? This campaign is a profound miscalculation, a strategic blindness rooted in the belief that crowns and borders are the only things that matter. True control, you discover too late, isn't just about military occupation or putting your family on thrones. It requires some measure of acceptance, a passive consent from the governed. Brute force against a united populace doesn't win loyalty. It hardens resolve and breeds unending resistance. It also provides a dangerous example. Resistance is possible, even against the seemingly invincible emperor. This Spanish ulcer, slow and agonizing, begins to inspire similar nationalist stirrings elsewhere in your vast, overburdened empire. Ask yourself, was this monumental oversight a consequence of overconfidence or a fundamental failure to understand the non-military dimensions of power, culture, identity, popular spirit? What would you have done, standing in his boots, when the entire nation became the battlefield? You look east, past the draining marshes of Spain and the restive capitals of a weary continent. Despite the gnawing losses in the peninsula, despite the cold shoulder from former allies, despite the murmurs of discontent echoing even in Paris, you make the decision. It is the summer of 1812, and the target is Russia. This is not merely a tactical maneuver or a punitive strike. It is a full-spectrum gambit, the most ambitious and arguably the most reckless campaign you will ever embark upon. The declared objective: to force Tsar Alexander I back into the continental system, to economically strangle Britain by closing every last port. But underneath lies a deeper, more fundamental aim: to assert your absolute, unquestioned dominance over the entire European stage, from the Atlantic to the Urals. This is about bending the last remaining sovereign will to your own. The army you assemble is colossal, an unprecedented military machine gathered under a single banner, the Grande Armée, over 600,000 men, a kaleidoscope of nations and languages, French veterans, German auxiliaries, Italian contingents, Polish lancers, Dutch engineers, Swiss guards, Croatian infantry. Never before has such a force been marshaled. It feels invincible. It looks invincible. It is a testament to your power, your organizational genius, your ability to command the allegiance of a continent, even if through fear or reluctant obligation. As this vast, glittering serpent of humanity, horses and cannons, stretches back for miles across the plains towards the Niemen River, there is an intoxicating sense of destiny fulfilled, of a challenge met with overwhelming might. Surely no nation, no army, no ruler can stand before this tide. But as you cross the river and step onto Russian soil, the land itself begins to fight back. Russia isn't like the compact, populous, road-laced landscapes of Western and Central Europe. It is vast, empty, primordial. The distances are immense, swallowing up supply lines, stretching communications to breaking point. The enemy offers no pitched battle, no glorious Austerlitz moment to shatter their will in a single afternoon. Instead, they retreat. They burn their own villages, their own crops, poisoning wells as they go. This is the scorched earth, a brutal, horrifying tactic that denies your army sustenance, shelter, and the decisive engagement it craves. It is a war against a phantom, against absence, against a nation willing to sacrifice everything, even its own people's comfort, to bleed the invader dry. You march deeper, lured by the mirage of Moscow, believing that capturing the ancient capital will break the Tsar's resolve. But with every mile, the logistical nightmare intensifies. The wagons cannot keep pace. The horses die in droves, weakened by poor fodder and relentless marching. Men fall out, desert, or succumb to disease and exhaustion. The army, built for speed and decisive battles, begins to fray at the edges. What looked like an overwhelming strength, its sheer size, now becomes its greatest vulnerability. Feeding, equipping, and maintaining 600,000 men and hundreds of thousands of animals in a country that is actively destroying its own resources proves an insurmountable task. The strategic brilliance that one battles in fertile, cooperative lands is useless here. This is the critical point where ambition, unchecked and divorced from a realistic assessment of fundamental limits, the sheer geography, the crushing reality of logistics across vast distances, the brutal indifference of the climate to come, and crucially, the enemy's chilling willingness to endure unimaginable suffering and sacrifice ground, becomes a blind march towards self-destruction. You believed your will, the sheer force of your personality, and the might of your army could conquer reality itself, that a political objective could override the physical laws of logistics and endurance. It is the ultimate delusion of absolute power, the tragic irony being that the instrument of your greatest strength, the Grande Armée's scale, was destined to become the very mechanism of its undoing in this unforgiving theater. Ask yourself, when does supreme confidence tip into fatal hubris? Was the refusal to see the insurmountable obstacles a sign of unbreakable will, or simply a catastrophic failure of judgment? The embers of Moscow still glowed, a dying heart in a city you claimed but could not hold. The Tsar, Alexander, stood resolute, refusing to give you the peace treaty you desperately needed. Trapped in a burning capital with an army that was already showing cracks. Winter, the true general of Russia, descended with a vengeance that mocked your maps and logistical plans. Snow falls, not just as weather, but as an enemy. The Grande Armée, once a vibrant tapestry of nations united under your eagle, begins to unravel thread by thread. The retreat from Moscow is not a march, but a death procession. The order dissolves into chaos. Men freeze, starve, succumb to disease, or fall to the persistent, gnawing attacks of the Cossacks. Your once proud soldiers discard their weapons, their discipline, their humanity, in a desperate scramble for warmth, for food, for mere survival. The Berezina River crossing becomes a nightmare etched in history, a scene of unimaginable suffering and sacrifice where thousands drown or are crushed. This isn't glory. It is the brutal, unforgiving face of failure. You look upon the disintegrating remnants of your army, a fraction of the 500,000 you led into Russia, and make a hard calculation. To stay is to freeze with them, to share their terminal fate. To leave is to survive, to race back to Paris and raise a new army, to salvage the empire you nearly destroyed. It's pragmatic, cold logic, but it also shatters the myth you cultivated, the image of the emperor sharing every hardship, the invincible leader guiding his men to victory. You abandon your soldiers to their fate in the snow, traveling incognito by sleigh, leaving behind a legend wounded perhaps more deeply than any physical loss. This catastrophic failure wasn't just bad luck. It was the inevitable consequence of ambition left unchecked, imperial overreach blinding you to reality. You ignored the warnings, underestimated the enemy's resolve and the environment's cruelty, substituting meticulous strategic planning with sheer force of will, believing your genius could overcome any obstacle. Here, reality asserts itself with a horrific, crushing force. The tragic irony, the man who mastered the battlefield is undone by logistics, weather, and a refusal to admit he was wrong. The insight is stark. No amount of past brilliance can compensate for ignoring the fundamental constraints of the world. Reality has a way of collecting its dues, often with compound interest paid in blood and ice. Ask yourself, was leaving the army a necessary evil for the good of the state, or the ultimate act of self-preservation by a leader who had finally broken under the weight of his own hubris? What would you have done with an empire teetering and 500,000 lives melting away in the Russian snows? The moral is brutal. Even the grandest ambitions crumble when they ignore the simple, undeniable truths of the world. The price of overreach is paid in unimaginable suffering. Saint Helena. The name echoes like the clang of a cell door closing. After the whirlwind of abdication, the desperate 100 days, the final, shattering gambit at Waterloo, you find yourself here. A volcanic speck in the immense, indifferent South Atlantic, thousands of miles from the Europe you bent to your will. The waves crash against unforgiving cliffs, a constant, mocking reminder of the vastness you cannot cross. British sentries patrol the perimeter, their presence a physical manifestation of your defeat. The world you knew continues without you, a stage from which you have been brutally removed. Your new empire is Longwood House, damp, modest, relentlessly guarded. The corridors of power have shrunk to the confines of a few rooms. Here, the man who dictated terms to emperors and kings now dictates to secretaries. His gaze fixed not on maps of future campaigns, but on the blank pages of the past. This is your final battlefield, the war for your own legacy. You spend hours recounting your campaigns, your political machinations, your grand designs. Each word is carefully chosen, each event shaped and polished. The story you tell is of a revolutionary force, a brilliant strategist, a victim of circumstance and the treachery of others. You meticulously lay blame at every door but your own. Your marshals failed you. Your allies betrayed you. The British conspired against you. The sheer scale of self-justification is breathtaking, almost audacious in its completeness. Yet in this relentless crafting of myth, the true subject remains stubbornly out of reach. You rarely, if ever, truly grapple with the possibility that your own boundless, insatiable ambition was the engine of your destruction. The fatal flaw wasn't a tactical error at Borodino or a delay at Waterloo. It was the inability to ever say enough. It was the unwavering belief that you were destined to command everything and that your vision, your will, superseded all else, including reality, diplomacy, and human cost. This exile is not just a physical cage. It is a portrait of ambition trapped by its own inability to introspect. The irony is profound. The master strategist, cornered not by an enemy army, but by the mirror. He who conquered nations cannot conquer his own ego. He dedicates his remaining years to sculpting a narrative, preferring the smooth, heroic lines of a carefully edited history to the messy, uncomfortable truth of a life driven past all reasonable limits. This is the ultimate act of a leader, unwilling to acknowledge fundamental errors in judgment and character. Consider this. What is the true mark of leadership in defeat? Is it the ability to construct a flawless historical narrative? Or the courage to confront one's own failures? Napoleon, the architect of modern warfare, arguably failed this final test. His brilliance brought him to the pinnacle, but his inability to look inward, to take responsibility for the consequences of his limitless drive, consigned him to this island cage, leaving behind a legacy forever debated between genius and devastating hubris. Ask yourself, can true greatness exist without self-awareness? In this isolated house, the silent answer seems to be a resounding, tragic no. And you stand, now just a man, on a distant island, the boundless energy that reshaped Europe constrained by rock and sea. The arc of your life is complete. The hungry outsider, scraping by in Corsica, the revolutionary savior, seizing chaos in Paris, the pragmatic builder, codifying law and order, the paranoid consul, consolidating power, the self-crowned emperor, a Caesar for a new age, the relentless conqueror, painting maps red with ambition, the overextended ruler, stretching the possible past its breaking point, the defeated exile, contemplating a vanished empire. Your life story reveals, in stark, monumental clarity, the intoxicating, transformative, and ultimately destructive power of unchecked ambition. You brought a whirlwind of order, a modern administrative state, and enduring legal frameworks like the Civil Code to France and beyond. Projects undeniably born of that same restless, brilliant energy that later sought to impose your singular will on an entire continent through force, ego, and dynastic dreams. The line between ambition for a better state and ambition for personal glory is razor thin, invisible until it's too late. And you vaulted over it with that coronation ceremony, adorning yourself with the symbols of empire, and never looked back. Not truly, until the world, weary and bleeding, finally forced you to stop. What if history repeated itself? What if a brilliant, driven individual today, navigating the complex currents of a disrupted world, rising from relative obscurity, through sheer talent and seizing opportunities forged in uncertainty, faces that same fundamental choice you faced: to consolidate gains, build institutions, and serve the collective good with that hard-won power, or to crown themselves, expand relentlessly, demand absolute control, viewing any challenge, any dissenting voice, as an existential threat to their destiny. The human heart, with its complex, enduring mix of insecurity and grand aspiration, remains fertile ground for such choices, regardless of the era. Your life serves as a monumental, tragic case study in the peril of believing your will is destiny, that success grants you the right to redefine reality itself according to your whims. You famously uttered, looking back from St. Helena, "My true glory is not 40 battles. Waterloo will erase the memory of so many victories, but that which nothing will erase, that which will live forever, is my civil code." It is a poignant, perhaps tragically ironic statement, for you spent the latter half of your world-altering career prioritizing the fleeting, blood-soaked glory of battles and the expansion of a fragile empire built on conquest over the enduring impact of that very code. A slave to the imperial ambition you ultimately chose to become. Consider this: the empires built on ego and gunpowder crumble to dust or are swept away by the tides of history. But the foundations laid with principle, with law, with a vision beyond the self, those can endure the test of time, shaping generations. The choice in every era, in every heart touched by that fire of ambition, belongs solely to that ambitious soul. In the end, it wasn't just the armies of Europe that defeated him. It was believing his will could rewrite reality forever.